Namaskar, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. You're watching Perspective with me, Tina Jha. Russian President Vladimir Putin will be on an official visit to India on the 6th of December for the 21st India-Russia Annual Summit with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The visit is in continuation of the tradition of annual summits alternately in India and Russia. The last such summit was held in September 2019 during the visit of Prime Minister Modi to Vladivostok in Russia. The annual summit could not take place in the year 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic situation. So this will be the first in-person meeting of the Russian President and Prime Minister Narendra Modi after their meeting on the sidelines of the BRICS summit in Brasilia in November 2019. Although there have been several virtual meetings for multilateral summits and also telephonic conversations between the two leaders. Now, according to the Ministry of External Affairs, President Putin and Prime Minister Modi will review the state and prospects of bilateral relations and discuss ways to further strengthen the strategic partnership between the two countries. The summit will also afford an opportunity to exchange views on regional, multilateral and international issues of mutual interest. The annual summit will be preceded by the inaugural 2+2 dialogue of the defense and foreign ministers of both India and Russia, and are expected to further strengthen the strategic partnership between both countries. Today on the show, we will discuss with experts the importance of this visit of the Russian President to India, the range of issues that President Putin and Prime Minister Modi will discuss during the annual summit, what will the 2+2 mechanism focus on, and also the concerns in the otherwise steady relationship between India and Russia. Joining me are three distinguished panelists on the show today. So let me first introduce them to you. I have with me Mr. Ajay Malhotra, his former Indian ambassador to Russia, Professor Harsh V. Pant, Head Strategic Studies Program at the Observer Research Foundation, and Dr. Uttam Kumar Sinha, Fellow at the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on Sansad TV. Ambassador, allow me to begin the program today with your views on the significance of the visit of the Russian President to India for this annual summit. What is expected on the India-Russia talks table at the annual summit, which of course comes after a year's gap?
Well, first of all, it's important to recognize that despite there still being a COVID wave in Russia, Putin has made an exception to come to India and meet face-to-face with Prime Minister Modi. What can we expect? I think, well, there would be, the visit is going to be a short one, as has also been rather traditional. Because there are many opportunities to meet normally through the year. But given the situation prevailing in the world, I think he'll be here from 6 to 7 or 8 hours. And as you mentioned, there would be the meeting of the Military Technical Commission before that, yes, and the 2+2 meeting. The 2+2 meeting will be held for the first time. It is a format we do with several developed countries, with the USA, UK, Australia, Japan, perhaps others, but for the first time with Russia. What can be expected? Putin's advisor, Mr. Ushakov, mentioned 10 agreements. I think some are fairly clear. One is you would have a long-term military technical cooperation program for 2021 to 30. That is overdue. It should have been signed by now. And I think one of the reasons why, in fact, this is taking place is to get such documents out of the way. You would also have the intergovernmental agreement on supply of defense spares. This would address product support concerns that are there. These have been finalized before, so we know that they have been prepared and kept ready for signature. And then you would have the I guess what one can call perennials. There would be traditional documents on science, culture, education, etc. I would suspect there would be something on space also, given that we are cooperating in training our 4 crew members in Russia, and we have had our doctors go there for our Gaganyaan program, and most certainly something on energy. Okay. The contours of that we'll only know a little later, what exactly, but Rosneft is going to be present, and so we expect something on energy too to be there.
Certainly. So a range of issues to build up on the bilateral relations. Professor Pant, coming to, for your perspective on the 2+2 dialogue, which is, of course, the inaugural one. This is one mechanism that we have only with 3 other countries, in Japan, the United States and Australia. So the significance of this 2+2 dialogue, and what is going to be the priority area of the 2+2 dialogue?
Well, traditionally, the 2+2 dialogue, the mechanism is to, if you have a strategic relationship with a partner, then the idea is that, a 2+2 dialogue allows you to bring together the security and the foreign diplomatic aspects of the relationship to have a more holistic approach to the relationship, and of course, with the kind of countries that we have had this platform, this arrangement with, Russia is being added to that list. Again, I think significant in the sense that it conveys a certain message to the world that India and Russia remain serious about a relationship, which has been undergoing a transformation, and that the two nations want to build on the legacy of the past. That there is no, there has been a discussion going on about the abandonment of each other. I think some of that will be put to rest with this, because clearly, as the Ambassador said, Mr. Putin's visit, personal visit for the summit, as well as the inaugural 2+2 dialogue, is a good enough, I think, symbol or from optics perspective to underscore that this is a relationship that both nations value. And this is a relationship that is quite strategic in nature by bringing together formally bringing together the diplomatic and defense aspects on one single platform. The two nations are really engaged with each other at a level where which is not really true for many other countries. So clearly, from both perspectives, this is going to be an important development. I think the challenge and the issue that Indo-Russian relationship has been facing for a while is that while we talk about the historical relationship, I think that the relationship has been undergoing a transformation in terms of the contemporary evolution of international system. Absolutely. And there, the questions will be raised as to how far can we take this relationship from here. But the symbolism, I think, of the visit as well as the 2+2 dialogue is important enough to, I think, to put to rest some of the speculation on that front.
Certainly. And these areas of concern is something that I'll come back to and discuss in the course of the program. But Dr. Sinha, coming to you to understand, because between India and Russia, the bedrock of our relationship has been defense and security cooperation. So for the coming decade, how do you see President Putin's visit setting the stage for renewing this cooperation in a much more stronger way?
Yes, I think first we have to really understand that there is a strong symbolism and there is also a long history of 50 years of India-Russia friendship. And also there is an enduring legacy Professor Khan talked about, the strategic partnership, which actually began in 2000 under Atal Bihari Vajpayee. And these called for annual summits to move the relationship forward through political dialogue. So we're in the time now that we have, after 20 years, 2 decades, we'll have to assess this entire partnership and see where it is going to lead us to. And I think it's now, as you see, it's become a sort of a special and privileged strategic partnership. So therefore, there is a whole lot of attention and focus, not only on the military, I think, but there are wider, diverse areas which I think will strengthen the entire bilateral relationship. I think importantly, we must understand, despite all this traction at the bilateral level, remember bilateral relationships are also influenced by the larger geopolitical and the geoeconomic dynamics. And I think that is also having a significant effect on the bilateral issues between India and China. And very quietly, I think, in the last couple of years in particular, India and China have converged, India and Russia have converged in many areas, certainly to improve their economic ties in particular. And I think, therefore, one of the significant elements of this visit would be the signing the reciprocal exchange of logistics agreement, which I think would be of an important part of this whole relationship, which will, in some sense, try to bring Russia into the Indian Ocean and its rim association. I think that will be an important element. And there would also be, and I would be definitely looking at some of the new drivers in the agreement, possibly 10, maybe a little more than that. But some of the new drivers will be really important to push this relationship further and beyond just the military sort of dynamics that exists. Okay. Trade, technology, energy, and I think critically important would be connectivity issue, between India and Russia.
Absolutely. Ambassador, Mr. Sinha raised a very important point that bilateral relations are impacted by changes in geopolitics. Do you think the changing winds of international geopolitics, also geoeconomics, have impacted India-Russia relationship, particularly in recent years?
Most certainly, and I think including in particular since they last met face-to-face. So it's a good opportunity to, as the Russians say, set their watches and see that we're on the same page on many issues. Because you can make short telephone conversations and have virtual meetings, but those are like, a virtual meeting might be half an hour, presence on either side. But here, after it has been systematically digested at a high level by the concerned minister, etc., you see what else remains and where you need to get things exactly right. And there are issues like that. I think one is Afghanistan, for example. It has changed completely since they met last in Brasilia. And certainly there will be an exchange of view. And our positions have, again, happily started to converge a lot more compared to a period in between there when certain dichotomies seem to appear. So there are things to discuss. There's the situation in Iran. There are what is to be done up there. So there are issues that are ready and ripe for discussion, and which I think a confidential few minutes pull apart or discussion between the two top leaders would really help move things along in terms of setting the stage for further cooperation on such topical issues.
Absolutely. Professor, I recall the External Affairs Minister, when he was in Russia in July, he had made a statement that India and Russia relationship is a steady one. But the paradox of this relationship is that sometimes it is taken for granted. So in that context, if we try and understand, which are the main areas of divergence, particularly that have emerged in recent years, and when we talk about areas of concern that need to be looked into, which are the main areas that we are talking about?
Any relationship or any foreign, any nation's foreign policy, it's never static, right? It's always evolving. So if we keep on looking for answers in history for what is happening today, we may not get those answers. We have to look at the answers from a contemporary perspective as to why is it that certain things are happening in Indo-Russian relationship, and certain ideas that India is pushing forth are not being taken on board in Moscow. The reality is, of course, that the power structure of in global politics has undergone a fundamental transformation, and the China factor remains the elephant in the room, where every conversation is about China. China's rise is impacting countries far and wide. Russia and India are no exception. So when you look at how the role of China is impacting Indian foreign policy, and when you look at what is the role China is playing in Russian foreign policy, I think you get a lot of the answers quite categorically. That for Russia, the Russian foreign policies prism for the last several years under Mr. Putin has been largely through the lens of its competition with the West. This disenchantment with the US. And I think that has led Russians and the Chinese into a kind of embrace that at one point people said would never really happen. But today it is happening. It is a reality. And countries like India have to figure out a response to that challenge in more ways than one. So it is very, very interesting if you think about what is going to happen next week, because you are going to have Mr. Putin's visit, and then you have the Democracy Summit, where India is also likely to participate, which called by the US president. So I think in some ways next week lays bare the challenges that India is facing, India is likely to face in navigating the pressures of great power politics. India has done that in the past, and it will continue to shape India's behavior in the future as well. But I think that is the challenge, that how do you have a conversation with Russia on matters where we are not convergent? So we recall Mr. Lavrov's statements on Indo-Pacific, we recall his statement on Quad, and quite vociferous statements, in some ways more vociferous than the Chinese themselves. So clearly, I think there is a challenge there in terms of how do you bridge that gap, but also to make sure that those challenges do not become overwhelming, because the convergences are also equally strong.
Absolutely. Dr. Sinha, so Indo-Pacific clearly looks like one area which is the major area of concern and on which both sides have to sit and clarify. Perhaps, do you think there is a differing in understanding in the way India looks at the whole Indo-Pacific cooperation, multilateral cooperation, which involves the United States, Australia, Japan and India, and the way Russia perceives it to be? Is there a differing in understanding somewhere?
Well, I think first and foremost, India should have its own vision of an Indo-Pacific, not be overly influenced by what the United States is thinking about the Indo-Pacific. I think that's a starting point to really draw in Russia into your larger strategic matrix, because obviously the Russians are tentative and hesitant about this, the Indo-Pacific, the Quad in particular. And therefore, I think this step of how India envisions the Indo-Pacific and whether Russia, in some sense, are part of that vision is quite important. And I think that messaging needs to be communicated to Russia in particular. I remember the Prime Minister in Vladivostok for the Economic Forum a few months ago, maybe July, was it September? He also highlighted a very important element which we tend to miss, the civilizational significance, the historical role, and called Vladivostok as a true sangam of Eurasia and the Pacific. And I think this kind of vision, this articulation of how India thinks about its strategic space is quite important to communicate to the Russians. They'll feel far more assured. I think in bilateral relationship, assurance is a very important part of it. And assurance will play an important part of India-Russian relationship in the future. And I think, therefore, issues like connectivity, the corridors that are being developed, these are very on-ground development which will bind the two countries. For example, the Chennai-Vladivostok maritime corridor, which will connect the eastern seaboard of India to the eastern side of Russia, the Far East as it is called, will be quite important. It will be an extension to many of the gains that Russia and India will sort of work out in the future. So I think these are elements that needs to be fused in, elements of development, elements of connectivity, elements of national progress. In South Asia, when we work with our neighborhood countries, we use a phrase to say, locked into each other's intestine. I think India and Russia needs to be also locked into each other's larger national development growth. And we'll have to find ways to do that.
Okay, Ambassador, so when we have to find ways to do that, maximize convergences and minimize the divergences, what is the road ahead then for India-Russia relationship so that it's not just steady, but it has the connect, the romanticism that it has carried for years?
Well, I think the romanticism looks after itself. We just need to have the framework in place for it to continue to flow forward. But we need to find new elements on which we would like to concentrate. For example, investments. That has changed in a big way. If earlier, looking at, for example, the investment into Essar Oil, it's a big one, 12.9 billion. So we have to develop new areas of cooperation. And looking at the strategic aspect, I think we need to more effectively explain to each other the underlying reasons behind our positions. I think one is China. And again, on the China point, we have had these differences on our border with China since we last met. There'll be an opportunity to provide inputs directly to Putin. I think that should not be lost. But yes, we should look at reducing those divergences that were spoken of. Asia-Pacific or Indo-Pacific, this can easily be worked around. What happens on Afghanistan? I think we've come closer now that everyone sees that this Taliban is going nowhere. How do we handle Central Asia? The entire region between us. All of us would like to see it as one of calm and peace and not extremist in any sense, where the flow of illicit drugs and arms is kept out, and which is not dominated by a power which is unfriendly to either of us. In this case, earlier for the Russians, it might have been USA. But I think there's also a China angle out there. Absolutely. And looking at what China is doing and the messaging that comes out of some of the informal structures in China, claims to the Pamir region of Tajikistan, etc., issues over the Russian maritime territories. It might be not formally put forward, but these are concerns. So these are issues on which I think both sides need to work at better understanding and seeing what it is that binds us together, because there's a lot.
Certainly.
And if we work through it, we can, I think, do much more together as we go ahead.
Dr. Sinha, the ambassador mentioned Afghanistan. Of course, we all know the return of the Taliban has posed a grave security threat, not just to India, but the entire region. So as strategic partners, important strategic partners, how can India and Russia build up a cooperation to ensure that Afghanistan is not used as a hotbed of terrorism and also for drug trade?
I think Afghanistan has incredibly changed the equation, with the events unfolding. I think there is a greater space of convergence in Afghanistan between India and Russia, which was not there earlier, with the larger influence and role of the United States. I think the United Nations is a great platform for both the countries to work together. But a history of bringing in ideas and defending certain resolutions, so that will be something that we'll have to see. Recently, I think both the countries have had good experience. India sort of supported Russia in the Crimea resolution in the United Nations. Likewise, the Russian did on Article 370, which we passed here. So I think the convergences, these strategic convergences, will also be played out at institutional levels, like the United Nations. And both Russia and India will be an important voice in these institutions to raise issues and bring in concerns and look at areas where you can really tackle. But also, I think, one of the things between India and Russia, which I think is important to highlight, is none of the two countries really would like a dominant power in Asia or a hegemon, so to speak. I think this actually will bind the two countries increasingly more and more in the future, and they will look for greater cooperative arrangement to see that no hegemon, whether it's China or the larger influence of the United States, comes and pervades Asia in particular. So I think there will be good grounds now. Plenty, of course, to cover, but I think we do have enough what is called traction in that space to take these two countries forward. Remember, also there are new areas which are opening up. The Arctic, for example, the Northern Sea route, which is melting. Of course, it's distant for us and we don't gain much out of it. But even our, sort of knowledge capacity that we have, for example, in hydrographic capacity, we are members of the Hydrographic Commission on the Antarctic, and India and Russia cooperated there to survey the entire Antarctic waters. Even the Arctic waters would require such kind of hydrographic surveys, and India has that capability and capacity to work with Russia in the Arctic region, apart from the oil and the gas which is being explored, which is, of course, an area which is, immediately brings in great attraction. But I think these are also knowledge capacity that India has had, which can infuse new sort of bilateral relationship weight, that will happen. Mapping the Arctic route, for example, is critically important as we explore. Remember, India is also a country that provides a lot of seafarers. We are probably the third or the fourth largest provider of seafarers to the maritime industry. And as Russia's maritime industries open up in the Arctic, we can be a great provider of the workforce there. A large migrant community heading towards the destination in Arctic would add great traction to the relationship. So there are great spaces, great opening, great areas emerging where we need to collaborate and cooperate.
Absolutely. So, Professor, obviously need for new avenues to be explored, to rework, to step up the cooperation. And in one area that specifically requires more attention is economic relationship. We've seen how, despite holding a lot of promise, there are certain challenges due to which the maximum potential has not been utilized. So what are the kind of measures, the efforts that are required on both parts to build up on economic relationship?
Tina, this is, I think, vital importance that India-Russia move to a paradigm to a new paradigm in their relationship where economic issues become the driving force. We tend to talk of India-Russia relationship, and if you are generally, start the conversation, most likely it starts with defense cooperation and ends with defense cooperation and defense sales. And I think that is not sustainable, both because India is diversifying and India will diversify, and also because Russian priorities are also changing. So in a sense, while it is important, it is always going to be important with 65%, around 65% of our reliance being on Russia. But I think, this unidimensional nature of the relationship has to evolve. And I think the two leaders are aware of this. So we have seen, for example, Mr. Modi talking about in the Vladivostok summit a lot about India's investments in the Far East and what India can do there. In a lot of what Ambassador Malhotra was talking about in terms of we have seen investments, taking a new dimension. But I think much more needs to be done, because that's where the real crunch is, that unless there is dynamism, economic dynamism in the relationship, relationships tend to stultify. And that's a reality that cannot be, wished away. And so while a lot of this, while we welcome Mr. Putin at home, a lot of this relationship is being driven top down. I think we need more bottom-up engagement where other stakeholders are as robustly involved in this relationship as the top-level strategic level leadership in both countries.
Certainly. Very valid point that the unidimensional nature of India-Russia relationship has to evolve. As our panelists suggested, new avenues of cooperation have to be explored, they have to be strengthened, and relationship has to build up on the defense and security cooperation that we enjoy as on date. Thank you to all my panelists for joining me on the program today, sharing your perspective with us and our viewers. It was a pleasure having you on the program. So that's it from us on this edition of Perspective Today. Thanks very much to all our viewers for their time.